Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhaṃ Dhammaṃ Sanghaṃ Namasami. Pavarana Day, 2021, October 21st. So maybe anybody listening to this talk this evening, this might be a new word, Pavarana. Maybe you're newer to our tradition. So today marks the final day of the annual 3-month rains retreat. In our scriptural language, in the Pali language, we call the Vasa, rainy season. And this follows the seasonal patterns of most of Asia. In the monsoon season. Just as a little bit of brief background, it's a time when we determine to live together for 3 months, to not be changing communities or wandering off for just any old reason. But there are certain reasons that we can travel, and you can only travel for so long, for up to 6 days before you need to come back. And at the time, so traveling would have meant very different conditions, during a rainy season than during a dry season. So if you think of 2,500 years ago, what the roads and pathways and tracks would have been like, and then for anybody who has been to a country that experiences great distinctions between dry season and wet season, things really grow in the wet season. And so this was a way of not going out and just wandering, trampling over plants and possibly living beings, living in those plants. It was also difficult to travel. So it had a very practical reason. And it brought, as a result, that brought together monks and nuns who would have quite possibly been wandering for most of the rest of the year, especially in those early years before the more established monasteries were settled, created. So obviously nowadays, whether we go to our local towns or cities in the summer or the winter, it's not the same conditions that we would have experienced in India or Southeast Asia, South Asia. The roads are the roads. They're either wet or dry. They're either clean or not clean, but they're not muddy tracks and they're not overgrown typically. But we follow this tradition, and I personally, each year I feel more in tune with it, this tradition of stability and the benefits, the potential benefits that can come from that stability. The stability of community, of communal harmony, opportunity to develop communal harmony, and if the harmony is not there already, one can establish it, one can cultivate it. And so with the pandemic, the continuing pandemic, we've also had for almost 2 years now, very stable support from people from the broader community who come to live here for typically a minimum of a couple of months, or maybe a little bit shorter in some cases, but in a lot of cases for much longer than that. And so that's also created a stability. And as much as I delight in being open to people coming for very short stays, I do miss being able for us to be able to provide that. And I can also see the result of having this stability and how we can get to know one another in a way as we're all sharing on a spiritual path. So today is, as I mentioned, is the last day of the 3 months rains retreat. It's a lunar pattern, so it begins typically on the full moon of July and ends on the full moon of October. So tomorrow at dawn, it will be officially finished, because that's where we demark. That's the turning point between days in our tradition. Dawn. Pavarna means invitation. It's the most used translation into the English. And so this morning the monastic community had this ancient ceremony of inviting feedback. In a lot of the translations of our text, the English word they use for feedback is admonishment. But I have to admit, I tend to steer towards the word feedback, or sometimes I'll use the word encouragement. But I find feedback, just my own cultural conditioning, I find feedback far more accessible. For some reason the word admonishment somehow has a pejorative, negative feeling to it. And so feedback, feedback can be it can be anything, To me, it doesn't have a negative sense to it. So we invite, and so it's a very formal ceremony that we did this morning. And if we just do the ceremony and then don't reflect on what we've just done, and then actually take it to heart, then I dare say it becomes an empty ceremony, sort of fruitless ceremony, or at best a lost opportunity. Now I realize that not everybody listening to this talk is living a monastic life, and so what I want to try and do is weave in to broaden it out to any living being, any person who's interested in growing and being open to feedback, being open to having our blind spots pointed out, or our errors, or having things pointed out to us that can help us and help the people that we have contact with. We were talking about this topic as part of our studies earlier this Vasa, earlier in the Rains retreat, as we were reviewing the training rules that we have. And we had quite an in-depth discussion on pavarna and feedback. And it was I found it very interesting, and also hearing other people's reflections on it and thoughts. And if I remember right, more than one person mentioned that that our cultural backgrounds, our cultural conditioning can be quite a significant, potentially a significant factor in how comfortable we feel with offering feedback. And I've noticed that over the years. And I think that is something to be taken into account when we're, especially if we do feel comfortable in offering feedback. But I also think that it's not something that we should just say, well, it's not part of our culture to do that, to just sort of put a stop to it just because we think that it's not part of our culture, because it is something that can be developed. And so spiritual life has so many different aspects. I know in the beginning of my interest in meditation and my application of meditation, in the very beginning, that was my spiritual practice, was just meditation. There was no other aspect to it. And then, seeing somebody request the precepts, the 5 precepts. Oh, what's that? Oh, there's something else here. There's whole nother part of it. And then, you learn all these different ways as the years go by. There's something called pavarna. Oh, this is around opening oneself up to, opening up to feedback, to growth, spiritual growth through hearing from others, being open. And then there's very immediate, practical and communal aspects to receiving feedback. But also, if we, the way I see it is that if we really reflect on it, it has the possibility for real profound spiritual growth. Because if we consider how much letting go of self, letting go of ego, of identity, of letting go of perceptions of oneself, and the need to create perceptions for other people. I mean, the list is very long. And so it ranges here again from the very practical, immediate, to profound, long-lasting, deep aspects of our spiritual path. And as we know, those of us who have been doing this longer or have had, depending on our experience, then we start to see that, it's not just meditation, it's not just following precepts, it's not just learning the monastic discipline, it's not just learning the suttas, it's not just being able to recite this or that. These are tools, these are aspects of it. But the Buddha left us with this huge array of reflective teachings. And as he famously said, I leave you the Dhamma and Vinaya, the Dhamma and the discipline. He set up these different protocols. As the years went by, what were left behind, in the scriptures around protocols, and very, I feel, just so skillful, such as the Pavarna. And I was rereading about it this evening, reading the chapter in one of our books on the monastic discipline, and the Buddha created this day once a year because that would have been probably the one of the only times of the year where people had really lived together long enough to potentially feel comfortable, and also to get to know people well enough, because it was very transient. Monastic communities, it was people coming and going and encountering each other on the road and various places, and so to be able to offer feedback, just maybe knowing somebody for a few days or spending a few days with him it's quite possible that it could be even inappropriate. You wouldn't really possibly know unless something was glaringly obvious, which I'm sure there were cases of that. So feedback. Years ago, I was introduced to the idea of how potentially useful some of the Buddha's words that he offered around how to offer feedback. I was introduced to how to the lay community, how potentially useful it was. And it was a situation. We had at a Bayagiri monastery in California, where I was living for the first several years of my monastic life. A school group came to visit, which is, at least in those days, in those years, that was very rare. It's not like in this country where schools would come quite a lot, but it was very rare to have a school group come. And my memory tells me that when we did a Q&A as part of their time there, I think one of the questions was, how do you deal with, do you ever get, maybe one of the children even said, do you ever get told off, or something like that? Do you ever get told off? And whoever answered the question, I think it was Ajahn Amaro, but my memory's a bit vague on that, brought up this way of that we hold offering or receiving feedback. And so in fact, they got so interested in it, and one of the teachers in particular wrote to the monastery afterwards and asked if that list could be sent to the school, because they thought that was really very interesting. This teacher wanted to cultivate it within the school. It's quite a small school, local small school, and somewhat alternative, very interesting school. And so when we're going to be offering feedback, there's a few lists, a couple of lists in particular, but there's some aspects that I really want to focus on, because to me they can be applied. Forget whether we're living a monastic life or not. Is it if we want to offer feedback to somebody, to have this, it's an interesting checklist which we can use as a starting point. So I'll just review that here. So one thing to consider is that, it says, I will speak at the right time and not the wrong time. So that's quite formal way of putting it in some ways. So, okay, we feel we want to offer something to somebody, some feedback. Is it the right time? Is this the right time? And our teacher Ajahn Chah, who our lineage formed around, and in Thailand, and before spreading to the West, I've been told that he would encourage the people in his monastery. Don't don't admonish somebody or give them feedback before they've eaten. And which might sound a little strange or funny, but one has to put that into context, is that there they just have the one meal a day, quite early in the morning, early in the day. So also those early years, I understand there was very rare that you get a hot drink with any sort of, now we can have coffee and tea, we're very well provided for, juice and things like that, which give us energy. But they would maybe not necessarily have that more than maybe once or twice a week, if that, from what I remember hearing in those early years. So there you are, it's been 23 and a half hours since you've had sustenance, and somebody comes up to you and wants to offer you some feedback. Might not be the right time. You've been up since early, before 3 in the morning, been to morning puja, meditation, been out on alms round, it's been quite active, you haven't eaten in 23 and a half hours, and somebody's, man, I'd like to offer you some feedback. So, but yeah, just taking that idea of, is this the right time? Does this person look hurried? What's the sort of vibe around? Because we have to consider that if we're going to offer somebody feedback, is, why are we doing it? We'll get to that. But you really want to get the best out of it, the best result for that person. And if it's affecting the community or yourself, then for everybody you want the best result. And so one try and be sensitive. Sensitive, and this is also another benefit of, when you're, to really only be offering feedback to somebody that at least somewhat, you can judge there. So is it the right time? The other thing is this the right place as part of that? So is there somebody else standing around? Is there somebody else sitting around? And when you go up and say, I'd like to offer you some feedback, because maybe that person might feel a little bit embarrassed or ill at ease. That might make them respond in a way that maybe isn't for the best. And it could potentially be easier to just blow that off and say, well, that's their problem. But really, here again, coming back to that, trying to be as skillful as possible. This is around developing skill, communication skills. And the second one is, I will speak about what is factual and not what is unfactual. So, yeah, you really know what you're talking about. So when we're talking about within the monastic community, if you're going to maybe point out a training rule, is that it's good to really review that rule. Really make sure that your understanding is as clear as possible, and if you have any questions about it, to question somebody else to clarify for yourself, so that you're not going to somebody and offering unhelpful feedback, unfactual feedback. If it's feedback around something more interpersonal, more around communal harmony, then really flip, as they say in the Chinese tradition, return the light and look inwards and say, well, where is this coming from? Is it just this person's habits annoy me, or is there actually something there? Is there something there that needs maybe some pointing out? Because it's not about telling somebody to change, but it's just offering some feedback about how something, if it's around a rule, then that's much more substantive and concrete. But if it's more around other behaviors, then one really needs to check where we're coming from. because we can't necessarily like everybody else's habits. Human beings, we're so diverse. Yeah, to just really check where we're coming from. Whose benefit are we looking at? Are we looking at our own benefit because maybe somebody's behaving in a way that we don't like, and we just want them to stop doing that because it gets up our nose? Or do we have their welfare at heart? That's why it's good to really consider carefully before we go ahead and offer feedback, to really reflect on our own intentions. I will speak gently and not harshly. And this is really, really important. Now, does that mean there's never a strong feedback given, especially in certain settings? Sometimes that can be entirely appropriate. Maybe either in a group, there can be group feedback, or individual. But one has to be really careful if one uses any sort of fierceness. One has to be very, very cautious and feel like you've got enough experience to know why that might be effective and needed at that time. I remember living with one elder who there was a situation arose with a lay visitor who was really struggling psychologically, and we were really trying to help this person, but it was really getting very difficult. They kept turning up at the monastery and wasn't taking on board the offers of help. And the senior monk asked the resident sangha, said, "Well, if this person turns up again, do people feel comfortable with me being fierce? Being fierce, being strong?" And I was really impressed. I was like, wow, that was really considering, And then in fact that did have to happen, and it in fact did help. This person's psychological condition needed a much stronger approach at that time. So it turned out to be well judged. But I remember a couple of weeks later, one of the monks saying, "Oh yeah, and then you spoke to them in that angry way." And they were just commenting on it; they weren't criticizing it. And the elder said, "No, I wasn't angry. I was fierce. And there was no anger in it. It was actually very calculated, very intentional, and not coming from a place of ill will." And that's one of the things here on this list, is that I will speak from a mind of goodwill and not from inner aversion. So maybe we are, really, we want to offer feedback to somebody, and we feel irritated. Maybe there's the way, maybe irritated. Let's say it is a training rule within the monastery, monastic setting. Maybe we're irritated that this person, we feel it keeps, maybe not following that rule correctly, or the way we do it here, or whatever. And if we feel aversion, if we feel that irritation, this is going back to the first point I made, is that it's not the right time. So I will speak at the right time. So to really check ourselves and to be circumspect and cautious around that. And if we are feeling that type of negativity, to find another time. So, within our monastic form, we are required to ask permission to offer feedback, which I find really beautiful myself. I'm really that really resonates with, to go and, put our hands together, and, if it is the right time, if we are in the right frame of mind, if we do feel that what we have to offer is factual, is to then, ask, I'd like to offer you some feedback. Is there a convenient time for you? Can we find, if you're willing, can we find a convenient time and place? Maybe just have a cup of tea or sit down quietly. And that also gives that person, a say. I find that if I actually say, well, would it be convenient? And when would it be convenient for you? Instead of, telling them, oh, I want to meet you at 5 o'clock or something. One here, it says, I will speak with what is connected with the goal, and not what is unconnected with the goal. Now that's quite a broad term. In fact, here it gives an alternative reading on that, but one could look at it as in the goal of spiritual life, the goal of living as a human being. One could look at it that way, or one can look at it, take another look at it, and just say, well, what are some of the more immediate goals? So, what I like to really here again consider is, what's my intention for wanting to offer this feedback? Now, as a person on the receiving end, this is really where we need to reflect, is that how do we receive just that request for feedback? So, and I have received feedback in my life, and in my monastic life I've received feedback, and sometimes it's not, I don't want it, per se. It can be painful to hear that, my actions, speech and actions have affected somebody negatively, or that I've maybe been operating from a misunderstanding. It doesn't, that in itself, I'm kind of like, it's not pleasant. But my own experience is that it's the afterglow, it's the result of receiving that feedback. And then that feels really, in my own experience, that feels really good. And the gratitude that we have the opportunity to feel, saying, because even if it's painful, to really think, wow, that person took the time and spent the energy and was upfront, and they did their best at trying to present this, and thank you. Thank you for taking the time. Thank you for actually caring enough. And this can create, I've seen this happen myself and with others, a sort of a feedback loop of trust and confidence in communicating and living and sharing with other people, the people that we're close to. That if I go to somebody with feedback and they receive it in a way that I feel was well received, skillful, that gives me the confidence to not feel fear if the need or the occasion arises again to approach that person. I need not feel reticent or fearful. If I go to somebody and it all goes not well, bad reaction, maybe angry outburst, or unreceived, not received, discounted, you name it. I don't. That confidence would probably not develop in me, and that other person would lose that opportunity to receive feedback. So this is where also on the receiving end, as I mentioned much earlier this evening, that letting go of self, that letting go of protecting the ego, that opening up to what's potentially painful. Even if at that time it's hard to bear, but thank you, and to reflect on, to go away and reflect on that. And if we feel that maybe that feedback was unfair or incorrect, go check in with somebody. This is where living in community and having the spiritual friendship, kalyanamitta, is so helpful. And then go check in with somebody maybe that we have a rapport with, where we feel comfortable, and share that, and not share it out of spite and say, oh, so and so came and, but go and say, well, I received this feedback, and I just wanted to get maybe some feedback from you. Can I just bounce this off you? And because I'd really like to reflect on this and see if it's something other people have noticed. And then living in community, we have so many opportunities just to learn from each other, and to learn. And I'm not talking about formal teaching, learning situations, but just day to day. Bumping up against each other with maybe different views and opinions, ideas, temperaments, personalities. Really learning. We can learn to soften. This is something that can be developed. This softening, opening, receiving. Grasping at views is such an obstruction. Grasping at righteousness is very, very obstructive. To be right. And then when we develop a righteous attitude around that, if we do, then if we start trying to impart that righteousness onto others, have an openness, not righteousness, but openness, to listen to other people. So developing sensitivity, like for instance these 5 points I went through, the sensitivity, skillful speech, non-violent communication. For those of us maybe familiar with that practice, non-violent communication, not blaming others for how we feel, but just expressing how we feel, not pointing fingers. But so this can be a very skillful way of opening up dialogue and openness and learning, and so that everybody's developing skillfully, developing skillful qualities. some other points that in these parts of the list that I was looking at today, and reminders that one should keep 5 qualities in mind when one is offering feedback. One is compassion. Compassion. So in the formal ceremony that we did this morning, that's one of the words. It says, out of compassion. And please offer. I open myself up to feedback. And so please, out of compassion, if you've seen or heard or suspected anything, let me know. So that's where that caring, you care about the person or the community and yourself. If it's more something's affecting you. Number 2, concern for the other person's welfare. So these are things that I already touched on, but you actually have a wholesome concern for that person's well-being. This feeds back to what I was talking about, intention. Is that intention, is it a wholesome? So sympathy, being sympathetic. Yeah, just seeing, that, we're all human beings. We all have this opportunity to grow as human beings. So you have a desire to it says here, see the person, to rehabilitate, help them be rehabilitated in their, whether it's wrong action, wrong speech, wrong view. If there's a wrong view, is to try and really try and steer that person towards right view, towards right action, right speech. And then the last one is particularly around living in the monastic form, but it says esteem for the Vinaya. And so, the monastic discipline, but just to have esteem for the good. Have esteem for what's wholesome, what's helpful, what's agreed upon. Behaviors. Here again, this can really vary quite broadly according to culture and the demographic of also the community you're living in, but to have esteem, respect. So living in a monastic form like this, we have the rules of discipline, training rules, but we're also every single one of us is subject to the law of the land. Cultural norms, where we're living. And in this tradition, some of us have had the opportunity to live in other countries, other monasteries, or at least visit, and if we haven't yet, we hopefully will. Tune in. It's really tune in to how things are done. So if we go to live someplace or visit in Thailand and the monasteries, tune in. Really, that's why I try to encourage all of us, myself, to try and be sensitive to what's going on. You keep an eye out. Go someplace new, keep an eye out. Oh, how do they do that here? Ask. Say to them, if we do move to another monastery, I find one thing that's really helpful is to let, if not the whole group know, at least the people closest to me, saying, if you see me, either doing something or about to do something that's not done here, please let me know. Just or to say to a community, say, or to you arrive to and go to the teacher, go to the abbot, and say something along the lines of, I just want to let you know of my openness to being offered feedback. So it's that invitation, inviting. Then people think, oh right, this person is open. They're actually, and they're interested. They're interested in this. And right there, that's a letting go. Right there, that's that opening. At least in my own experience, we're opening ourselves up. And I know, I was leaving one monastery one year, and we were going to do the formal pavarana, but I was leaving quite soon after pavarana day, and there was not going to be a katina that year, and but I went to the abbot and asked for forgiveness, but also asked privately, offered my pavarana just in English. But I have to admit, there was I was a bit sort of gulp, because I've just opened myself up, and maybe if I was going to hear something I didn't want to hear, and so it's just to notice that feeling, but also to rise above any feelings of reticence or hesitation, is to rise above that, to transcend that, and say, that's another act of letting go. So this is where it becomes more lofty, more profound, more deep aspect of the practice, not just around correcting behavior, but that letting go, opening, shedding. So we all have these opportunities for different skillful ways of being, develop skillful ways. As I said earlier, the living in community like this, right now we're 30, 32, 33, 34 people living here. There's a whole variety of different nationalities, different cultures that we've come from. I haven't counted recently, but I counted a couple of months ago. It was about 13 or 14 different nationalities living together. Different ages, different conditioning. And yet we all get along. And then on those occasions where there is maybe some misunderstanding or conflict or friction, is that if we develop these skillful ways of being, and take these things to heart, then it can only be for our benefit as an individual, our benefit as a community. Our growth in Dhamma, our ability to let go, and our opportunity to realize, the full fruits of what the Buddha left behind. From the looking through the scriptures that are left behind, how much energy the Buddha put into living together, putting in protocols, how to deal with things out of compassion. And so this is the legacy that we inherit. This is the legacy. And it's up to each one of us to take the opportunity. Take the opportunity. And then we're using our time here skillfully. I'll leave it there.
Sadhu.